Another popular plan for black is after playing d5 is later to develop the bishop to g7 after g6. The position appearing after e4, c5, c3, d5, take on d5, queen d5, d4, and the move g6 now. There are similar ideas, or the move g6 immediately, or the move knight f6, knight f3, and now g6. The ideas are quite similar, and here we will look at the best possible way for white to react to this development. The best way to react is to develop the knight on b1 to a3, followed by the move bishop c4, attacking the queen on d5. Here I would like to pay special attention to development of the white knight. Very often in all lines, not only in this one, there is a problem with the development of the knight on b1, because the best place for the knight is the square c3, but in most cases it is occupied by the pawn. And still we have to finish the development. And where to put the knight? To d2 or to a3? The square on d2 is a little bit passive for the knight, because the bishop on c1 remains undeveloped and it is being blocked. So the best place for knight is on a3. After the move is placed on a3, it has several very important functions. The first of all, the knight by itself can go to b5, and after the knight is on b5, it is threatening to win the exchange on c7. And later we'll look at a couple of games when this knight played a decisive role in the games. Another function of this knight on a3 is that it covers the square c4. And when the square c4 is covered, the bishop from f1 can go on to c4, attacking the queen on d5, as it happened in this present game. And another option for the knight on c3, that it can later go to c2 or to c4. The knight on c2 is also placed very well, because it is supporting the very important central pawn on d4. From the place on c4, the knight can go later on to e5 or to e3. And because of that, remember, knight on a3 in this type of the position is placed excellently. But let us return to the game and look how best is to react against the setup by black with g6 after d5. Knight e3, knight g7, and knight e3. Actually, this variation by black is very, very popular. And if you look in any database, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of games played with it. And until recently, there was no clear way for white how to prove his advantage here. But despite not so many theoretical knowledge, I knew for years that the best way is to play knight e3. And this game proves how white easily gets the advantage. Knight e3. The basic idea behind this move, that if, for example, now knight f6 is played, then bishop c4, queen e4, and bishop e3 is played. And if black takes on d4, then there is move bishop f7, very important intermediate move. If the king takes on f7, white wins the queen with a check. And when the king goes back to f8, white can win the pawn. It is still impossible to touch the bishop on f8. So this variation is tactically based, and it is not possible for black to take the pawn on d4. And if he castles, then white also castles. And if you compare how white pieces have been developed and how black, you can see a huge difference. White has already developed all his pieces, while only 2 black pieces have been developed, and the most developed piece for black is the queen on e4. But of course the queen in the center is a weakness, it is not a profit, and because of that white has an advantage here. Because of that, black took immediately on d4, and after that he played bishop c4, queen e4, and a very strong move, bishop e3. There are same tactical ideas as in the previous line. If black takes the bishop on f3 with a pawn, then there is check on f7. And after king f7, white wins the queen on e4. But if black refuses to take the bishop on f7 and plays king f8, then I give the check on d8 and force black to take this bishop, and after knight g5 I win the queen. This is the tactical basis for the whole line. Because of that, black has to play knight h6 here, protecting the pawn on f7. Knight f6 is not longer possible, as we already looked. There is a check on f7. So this move is forced. Then I simply take the pawn on d4, and you can see, in comparison with the previous lines, the knight even placed worse on h6 than on f6, and white has already a huge advantage here. The game continued bishop g4. It moves. This move looks quite logical, but actually it is tactically not sound, because white can play queen b3, and if taken on f3, then white takes on f3, queen e3, and white plays bishop d5, attacking the queen on f3, and later winning the pawn b7 and the rook a8 with huge material advantage. So because of that, there is no time for black to win this pawn on f3, and he has to play e6, protecting the d5 square from the possible move bishop d5. But this move allows white to play bishop d3. Of course, this move is not the only move. There was another option to try to win the material after knight b5, castle, and knight c7. It was also possible, but the complications were really not necessary for white in this position, and I decided to opt for a much safer option, exchanging the queens. The move queen d5 is the only one, and after the exchange, white plays knight e5. White position is very, very powerful. All his pieces in the center stand on the best places, and black position is already difficult. Here the only move was bishop e5. After d e5, knight e5, the bishop can go to g5 or to d2. White has a pair of bishop. The black pawn on d5 is weak, and obviously white has a huge advantage here. But it was still necessary for black, because after he played bishop e6, the position becomes immediately lost. black loses the material by force. White plays knight b5, and there is a double threat of knight c7 and knight d6 and knight b7, winning the pawn on b7. So black has to play king d8. I play knight rook c1. If knight a6, then knight d6 wins the material, because everything is under attack. The pawn b7, the pawn f7, the knight h6. The game continued. Knight d7, I played knight c7, rook c8, knight e6, took on e6, check on g5, and now you can see that white wins the exchange. It is not possible to defend both the bishop on h6 and the rook on h8. Another short game, only 20 move, and immediately after the opening, black found himself in serious problems, and he was not able to solve them, losing very quickly. This game is another very good example to show you the potential, and there are lots of dangers that can be seen in this line, the Sicilian with c3.